subcommittee hearing where we will highlight more abuses of your tax dollars. The left has funneled hundreds of billions of federal tax dollars through non-governmental organizations, NGOs, to push destructive policies and line the pockets of their friends and allies. This NGO scheme demonstrates massive waste and abuse of federal resources. Today's hearing will bring transparency for the American people. We will expose the corrupt ties that bind left-wing NGOs, Democrat elected officials, Democrat political appointees, and the deep state bureaucrats who write grants and contracts. Corrupt backdoor deal-making has exploited the taxpayer purse to achieve policy ends opposed by the very Americans forced to fund them. Whether by pushing green energy scams or facilitating the resettlement of millions of illegal aliens into American towns and cities, the alliance between big government and allied NGOs has been highly effective and has been flying under the public's radar for far too long. But today, we are going to draw back the curtain. The scheme works in a cycle, as shown here. Democrat administration officials work with leftist NGOs to implement programs in a manner that ensures those NGOs receive massive grants and contracts. The leaders of those recipient groups then turn around and donate to Democrat political campaigns. This intricate web of connections is how elected and appointed Democrat officials and allied NGOs work together. Federal agencies fund the NGOs, and the NGOs shape the agency's behavior. It can be hard to tell where the government ends and the NGO begins. The nonprofits essentially serve as an arm of the government. To put it another way, if the permanent bureaucracy is the de facto fourth branch of the government, then these leftist NGOs are the fifth. Our witnesses today will describe how the left has funneled hundreds of billions of U.S. tax dollars through NGOs, discuss the destructive policies this has enabled, and detail the damage done to our country. So-called green energy NGOs are among the worst offenders. They have used federal dollars to destabilize the U.S. power grid and energy dominance, while raising energy costs on Americans. The Biden EPA steered billions in U.S. tax dollars to leftist climate NGOs via a $20 billion slush fund known as the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, GGRF. Like-minded nonprofits were enlisted to implement President Biden's Green New Deal scam. While we are grateful to the Trump administration and EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin for shutting it down and quickly terminating these grants, further accountability is necessary. The full Committee on Oversight and Government Reform is investigating Biden's GGRF. We know that all the awardees are connected to both the Biden administration and Democratic donors, and that they sit on each other's boards in an incestuous circle. Today, we will shine light on this dynamic. Take, for example, who the Democrats choose to bring in as their witnesses. Someone so entrenched into the system that she was a director of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, a leader of a housing organization that lobbied for more federal spending, and now a nationally renowned nonprofit leader who donates to Democrat campaigns. Other examples include many green NGOs that employ former Biden administration officials. These people wrote the rules for this climate grift in which they now partake. As government officials, they were paid by taxpayers to conduct the grift. Now taxpayers are funding the grant awards that pay their salaries. This cash grab was so large that some nonprofits were birthed solely to get in on the game. One newly created nonprofit, Power Forward, received an astonishing $2 billion from Biden's EPA despite having just been formed. Power Forward is now part of a network tied to Rewiring America, which employs Stacey Abrams, the twice-failed Democrat candidate for governor in Georgia, and voting rights activist. After all, however, she would have been a good hire given her history of running her own nonprofit, which spent $3.2 million on campaign resources instructing voters to support her campaign, all of which are prohibited actions for nonprofits. Consequently, her nonprofit was levied the largest penalty ever imposed in Georgia's history for violating state campaign finance laws. This is the circle of life. Climate and energy is just one area where the entrenched bureaucrats and political appointees have partnered with NGOs to do the left's bidding. Illegal immigration is another. Federally funded NGOs have egregiously abused tax dollars to fund the invasion at our southern border by providing housing, transportation, legal services, and more to shepherd illegal aliens across our border and settle them in our country. These NGOs support the cartels in their mission to invade our country. Under the guise of assisting migrants, these groups have placed criminal networks, dangerous gangs, and human traffickers into American towns and cities. Think about this. The American people's hard-earned taxpayer dollars have been used to literally import rapists, murderers, and terrorists from around the world straight into our communities. Where were these NGOs when 22-year-old Laken Riley was violently murdered by an illegal? Where were these NGOs when 12-year-old Jocelyn Nungare was brutally raped and murdered by one of these illegals? And where were these NGOs when 20-year-old Kayla Hamilton was raped and strangled to death by an illegal? Where were these NGOs over the weekend when the illegal alien launched Molotov cocktails into a crowd in Boulder, Colorado, intentionally injuring a dozen Americans in an anti-Semitic attack? I'll tell you. They were continuing to receive taxpayer dollars to import more of these illegal alien monsters to commit more heinous crimes against our people. Many Americans are familiar with the more egregious offenders. These include Catholic Charities, which raked in over $2 billion during Biden's 4 years, and the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, which received over $221 million in government grants in fiscal year 2023 alone. But many American taxpayers are still unwittingly funding this sort of illegal activity through the United Nations, which is the conduit for much of the funding NGOs use to resettle in our country. Americans are likely unaware that their tax dollars are funding UN efforts such as the cash and voucher program involving 624,000 illegal aliens crossing the border just last year. This $372 million program provides prepaid debit cards and cash in envelopes to illegal aliens to facilitate their movement to and through the U.S. border. The American taxpayer is funding groups that start the migration, the groups that show people how to cross the border by evading U.S. immigration laws, these groups that have been bused and flown illegal aliens, many of them dangerous, into America. Whether exploiting taxpayers to push illegal immigration or fake environmental justice, the left's NGO scheme seeks to destroy our country and fundamentally alter the American way of life. This ongoing waste and abuse of taxpayer resources must end. The Trump administration is turning the tide, and today's hearing is intended to expedite the effort to drain these slush funds dry. If we don't, Democrats can't wait to return to power and continue funding their NGO friends through slush funds and stop deportations. Keep these illegal alien criminals in our country, and of course, fund the Green New Deal scam again. And with that, I yield to the ranking member Stansbury for her opening statement.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome indeed to the DOGE subcommittee. It's always an interesting journey here. Madam Chairwoman, before we get started, I want to take a moment to observe that this very subcommittee was created in January to act as the congressional tip of the spear for DOGE and Elon Musk's efforts inside the federal government, which our GOP colleagues were falling all over themselves to get in on the action. And in fact, I don't know if you know this, Madam Chairwoman, but one of your own GOP members who couldn't get on the committee actually contacted me to see if I could help because they were so desperate to participate in this activity. But here we are. I feel like we should play a breakup song in the midst of the breakup of the GOP with Elon Musk and DOGE, and yet still the zombie lurches on. And you know, I think it's interesting that people are barely saying his name in these halls, and this subcommittee barely has any credibility at this point. And Elon Musk still hasn't appeared under oath in front of this committee or anybody here in Congress. And in fact, Donald Trump himself apparently asked his own aides this week if DOGE was, and I quote the president, bullshit. Donald Trump asked if DOGE was bullshit. Meanwhile, our friend, Mr. Musk, is going crazy on Twitter. We just checked. He's still going at it. And he literally has been tweet storming the GOP for the last 24 hours. And he says, I'm sorry, but I just can't stand it anymore. This massive, outrageous, pork-filled congressional spending bill is a disgusting abomination. Shame on those who voted for it. You know you did wrong. You know it. And you know what I find interesting about his tweet is that he says, I'm sorry, I just can't stand it anymore. And I think, you know, the American people have been there for the last 3.5 months as they've dismantled the federal government, as Musk and Trump and his friends here have helped lay wake to the federal government, dismantling federal agencies, firing thousands of federal workers, stealing your private data, costing the federal government millions of dollars. And in fact, it appears that they may have actually cost more money than they apparently saved. So it's hard to take any of this seriously or with any credibility. Musk lied about DOGE and its savings. The president and the speaker just this morning, once again, lied about the big abomination of the bill and the deficit spending in it. There was a misrepresentation of a witness in this hearing last time. There was lies about the budget, reconciliation, and yes, the DOGE package, which was transmitted to Congress yesterday. And I don't think I even need to comment on the wild journey of baseless conspiracy theories that we just heard. So, it's very clear that DOGE has made America less safe, less secure, undermined our global and national security, compromised our data privacy, impacted our ability to serve our vulnerable communities, and left the government in total chaos. And yet, many of these DOGE brothers have implanted themselves inside of federal agencies and are now answering directly to the West Wing and to the Director of Office of Management and Budget, Mr. Russell Vought, who, by the way, is testifying just across this campus on his bill for the FY26 budget, which would eviscerate these programs. So I want to say, first, they came for our federal agencies. Then they came for our judges and law firms and the rule of law. Then they came for the free press and your freedom of speech. Then they came for higher education and our children. Then they came for congressional offices, and now here they are coming for civil society and nonprofit organizations. What are nonprofit organizations? Food banks, legal aid clinics, homeless shelters, organizations that are the glue of our communities. In fact, right now, they are withholding $500 billion illegally from nonprofit organizations that provide services for our communities, public safety, health services, housing, the big brothers and big sisters of America, Boys and Girls Club and Habitat for Humanity. Is this the dark money scare that we're hearing across the aisle? I think all of us understand what these organizations do in our communities. But let us be clear. The actions that are happening here in this committee and which the administration are trying to execute through executive actions, through letters, and yes, sending DOJ employees baselessly and illegally into nonprofit organizations are illegal. They lack moral authority and they lack legal authority. The truth is simple. Neither the president nor any other executive branch official has the power to unilaterally revoke an organization's tax-exempt status or to use these authoritarian tactics to try to intimidate our nonprofit and civil society organizations. And we will dive deeper into that topic and your rights during this hearing. But if my colleagues across the aisle want to talk about dark money networks, we can look no further than this very hearing room, because if we actually want to understand the dark money funded networks that are making the government run right now, let's talk about Project 2025. The witnesses who are here today as part of the organizations that helped to craft it. Mr. Vogt, who was at the helm as the architect of that document, and the folks who are inside the federal government right now, dismantling our agencies and attacking every aspect of our democracy. We will not stand for it. And with that, Madam Chairwoman, I yield back.
Without objection, Representatives Gosar of Arizona, Moskowitz of Florida, and Presley of Massachusetts are waived on to the subcommittee for the purpose of questioning the witnesses at today's committee hearing. I'm pleased to introduce our witnesses today. Scott Walker is the president of Capital Research Center and an expert in investigating how nonprofits spend money and get involved in politics and advocacy. Mark Krikorian is the executive director of the Center of Immigration Studies and is an expert on the issues of immigration and border security. Daniel Turner is the founder and executive director of Power the Future and an expert in energy and environmental issues. Diane Yentl is the president and chief executive officer of the National Council of Nonprofits. Again, I want to thank all of you for being here to testify today. Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witnesses will please stand and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Thank you. You may take a seat. We appreciate you being here today and look forward to your testimony. Let me remind the witnesses that we have read your written statements and they will appear in full in the hearing record. Please limit your oral statement to 5 minutes. As a reminder, please press the button on the microphone in front of you so that it is on and the members can hear you. When you begin to speak, the light in front of you will turn green. After 4 minutes, the light will turn yellow. When the red light comes on, your 5 minutes has expired, and we would ask that you please wrap it up quickly. I now recognize Mr. Walter for his opening statement.
Thank you. Chairwoman Green, Ranking Member Stansbury, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the honor of testifying. I'm president of the Capital Research Center, where we study nonprofits every day. Americans are proud of our nonprofit sector, which has long led the world because they love real charities that actually help people here and abroad. They don't think of the nonprofit sector as the plaything of billionaires and politicians. Yet, all too often, that is the reality of our non-governmental organizations, or NGOs. Far too many NGOs are really BGOs, basically government organizations, for 2 reasons. First, they get most of their money from government, not citizens. Second, they serve the big government political agenda that fights to centralize power in Washington for the benefit of the left's preferred political party. From countless egregious examples, consider the Solidarity Center. This nonprofit child of the country's largest union federation, the AFL-CIO, is chaired by the AFL-CIO's president. Solidarity Center doesn't just boost unions, it also champions DEI and climate justice. It's suing the current administration because DOJ recommended its federal gravy train end. It received over $86 million from the federal government since 2008. 61 of that 86 million was given under President Biden, doubtless encouraged by the 3 Solidarity employees who went into the Labor Department. Solidarity receives 99% of its revenue from American taxpayers. It serves the AFL-CIO, which gave 86% of its 2024 political donations to Democrats. Today's Democratic witness, Diane Yentl, is yet another powerful example of nonprofits serving big government. One of her typical tweets attacked DOJ and defended the Vera Institute of Justice, which in 2023 received 79% of its revenues from government. It's a hard-left, Soros-backed group whose priorities oppose the views of Americans' Democratic majority by advocating soft-on-crime policies and defending illegal aliens. Its biggest vendor in its last IRS filing was Blue State Digital, which began life as Barack Obama's digital campaign team and now serves the entire left. Ms. Yentl was hired by Obama at HUD, and President Biden considered her for a cabinet post. Her previous job was leading the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, an NGO that advocates for ever more federal spending by HUD and uses identity politics to justify its agenda. In her current job, leading the National Council of Nonprofits, Ms. Yentl quickly sued the Trump administration over budget cuts. What lawyers did she turn to? The Democracy Forward Foundation, whose board includes President Biden's notorious chief of staff, Ron Klain, and is chaired by Mark Elias, the Democratic super lawyer. Ms. Yentl claims the Republican tax bill would have handed, quote, unchecked power to the Trump administration to punish nonprofit orgs that don't fall in line with its ideology by labeling them as terrorist-supporting groups. Nonsense. As an honest left-leaning law professor explained in the Chronicle of Philanthropy, quote, a despot seeking to silence nonprofits would be weakened, not empowered by the legislation. No wonder nonprofit expert Bill Shambra warned that Yentl's partisanship at a major nonprofit membership group may erode public support for nonprofits by suggesting, quote, nonprofits are just like any other major institution of American society, fighting fiercely to maintain the status quo against necessary reforms. It's understandable, though not admirable, that status quo nonprofit leaders are scared by DOJ examining their government funding. They'll use an Urban Institute study designed to scare you members of Congress with statistics like government grants support nonprofits in every congressional district. No one explains why it's wonderful that so many nonprofits are as dependent on government cash as a meth addict is on methamphetamine. The same study stresses how larger nonprofits especially hoover up tax dollars. But while big nonprofits are often less effective at helping people compared to smaller neighborhood groups, they certainly are more powerful at lobbying government in the service of bigger government and the left. They're also great at suing government. This politicized pseudo-charity aimed at bloating government and seizing political power goes back decades, as when the Obama administration took money from Catholic charities and gave it to Planned Parenthood. This is a simple, ugly story of tax dollars, cronyism, and political scheming camouflaged by invoking the moving stories of the real heroes of America's charitable sector. Please don't fall for the sob stories.
Thank you, Mr. Walter. I now recognize Mr. Krikorian for his opening statement.
Thank you. During the 4 years of the Biden administration, the United States devoted significant taxpayer funds to facilitating illegal immigration. There's been much reporting about the role of NGOs in this process after the illegal immigrants crossed into the United States. But what the center has examined is what happened before the migrants got to the Rio Grande. In other words, how NGOs and UN agencies were paid by U.S. taxpayers to facilitate the illegal movement of migrants through South and Central America and Mexico. We've documented a large UN NGO support network from field reporting and annual reports from this group called the Regional Refugee and Migrant Response Plan. This network consisted of way stations all along Latin American illegal migration routes that made it possible for millions of foreign nationals from as many as 180 countries to illegally get to the U.S. border, in part funded by U.S. taxpayers. Some of these funds were provided directly to NGOs by the State Department's Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, or USAID. Other funding was sent indirectly through our funding of UN agencies, which then in turn funded NGOs. This often was described as merely humanitarian assistance to people who would travel anyway. But in reality, this amounted to a coordinated, well-funded assistance designed to undermine U.S. immigration laws. Starting in South America and Central America, NGOs handed out millions of dollars worth of supplies designed to assist recipients in their plans to illegally breach the borders, not just of the United States, but of half a dozen countries along the way. Just a couple of examples. In Colombia, in northwestern Colombia, the center found NGOs working in coordination with a paramilitary drug smuggling group called Clan del Golfo, also known as the Gaitanistas, which controlled the smuggling routes in those areas. To get an idea of how this worked, there's a town in northwest Colombia called Necoclí, which is a major staging area for migrants trying to cross the Gulf of Urabá to get to the jumping off point for trips through the Darien Gap. Well, our researcher went to Necoclí and found what amounted to kind of a swap meet or farmers market of NGO groups with booths of UN and NGO organizations there to provide assistance. Just a couple of examples, the Florida-based NGO Cadena was set up in a booth next to the Silver Spring-based Adventist Development and Relief Agency, and there were many other US-based and overseas-based groups there. And they provided a variety of services, assistance on how to make it through the Darien Gap, food, dry socks, backpacks, etc. When they crossed that Gulf of Urabá, they're still in Colombia, and they get to the village of Akandi, which is where you jump off to go to the Darien Gap. And there, the NGO UN group, the camp, was in a camp where the security for the camp was provided by this drug smuggling gang. In other words, and it's not clear to us, we don't have evidence of this, but it seems likely to me that NGOs and the UN paid for the security by paying this drug smuggling gang for security for this jumping off point. After they pass through Central America, they get to southern Mexico, cross from Guatemala into southern Mexico, and there, Tapachula is the town that is the first place you get to. And what we found there was a large, kind of a one-stop shop illegal immigration mall where the UN agencies and the NGOs were supposed to be housing them. This was under construction when we went last fall. And it was only one of many similar camps. There's several in northern Mexico as well. Especially curious in Tapachula was an NGO funded by the UN, which means funded by the US, which provided repressed memory therapy for illegal immigrants who had been rejected for asylum by Mexico, which they do in order to be able to make it through Mexico without hassles. They had been rejected. They went to the repressed memory therapy and got a certificate that they had forgotten about the persecution they had suffered, and now they remembered it, and so they went to their appeal and they got their asylum status. So throughout Latin America, these networks funded in part by US taxpayers have made this flow of illegal immigrants possible. And yet oversight has remained absent, and Congress has not cracked down and insisted that recipients of funding not engage in promoting illegal immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Krikorian. I now recognize Mr. Turner for his opening statement.
Madam Chairman Green, Ranking Member Stansberry, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee today. Three words often heard in tandem with DOGE are waste, fraud, and abuse, and I hope my testimony can shed light on the third word, abuse. I started my organization, Power the Future, to advocate for energy workers in rural America, and it has come to light that on the other side of that fight, the climate movement received billions from taxpayers, and that is the abuse I wish to highlight. The 2022 Inflation Reduction Act set aside hundreds of billions of dollars for the green agenda. The Environmental Protection Agency received tens of billions. As reported by the Washington Free Beacon, a staffer from an environmental group called the Coalition for Green Capital named Jahai Weiss joined the Biden EPA to direct $27 billion in green funding. For context, $27 billion is larger than the budgets of the Departments of Treasury, Interior, and Commerce. Yet Mr. Jahai went through no confirmation process, and his decision to direct tens of billions to organizations of his choosing had no congressional oversight. And conveniently, under his tenure in this new EPA role, $5 billion was granted to his former organization, the Coalition for Green Capital. The abundance of green dollars created a new pernicious mechanism: create a group for the sole purpose of getting government grants. For example, Power Forward Communities was only a few months old when it applied for and received nearly $9 billion to distribute at its own discretion. And one lucky recipient was an organization affiliated with two-time Georgia gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams. With only $100 in the bank, this group received $2 billion. Yes, it is legal to create a nonprofit, to get IRS accreditation, apply for and receive government grants, but it is fair to question the process and demand transparency. What does the application for a $9 billion grant look like? Particularly when an organization has no staff, no history in the space, no office, and is only a few months old. A Department of Defense grant of this size would have layers of transparency. A Department of Transportation grant that size would require a bond to guarantee deliverables. Yet it seems that in the name of climate change, unvetted, unelected, unconfirmed bureaucrats require no safeguards. And this is the precedent of pernicious funding. Any future president can announce a slush fund, appoint loyalists to dole it out, and anyone can create a group to get government billions if they know the right people, bypassing that pesky thing called Congress. In his recent Senate hearing, Secretary of State Rubio said, DOGE uncovered, for every dollar spent at USAID, only 12 cents was actually received in aid. The rest was spent on overhead, high salaries, dinners, events, travel, raising awareness. You can call it overhead, a better term is grift. But this funding scandal is far worse in context. For at the same time the Biden administration was generously rewarding climate groups with billions, they enacted the most radical energy agenda in history, which punished the American people. Making energy expensive made life expensive. And we saw under the Biden administration record high inflation, skyrocketing price of energy, gas, utilities, food, and consumer goods. It was bad enough to dole out billions, but to do it to the very groups making America unaffordable was a new low, even for Washington, D.C. And unless this Congress changes the laws, the mechanisms are still in place to appropriate new funds using a new crisis, forming new groups, skirting Congress, and ripping off the taxpayers. Last week, my organization sent letters to this committee and Attorney General Bondi calling for an investigation into the Biden administration use of AutoPen on green executive orders, asking if Biden himself directed them or if the staff took leniencies. A very severe accusation, but made even more plausible in the light of this hearing: abuse. Abuse of the purse, abuse of the pen, also that climate groups and their political allies could benefit. This is the very worst of Washington, and why the American people have such little trust in government. For our nation to survive, Congress must restore trust in government, end the slush fund abuse, stop the grift, and it is my sincere hope that my appearance here today can help begin the process. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. I now recognize Ms. Yentl for her opening statement.
Chairwoman Green, Ranking Member Stansberry, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to share how America's charitable nonprofits serve communities across the country. From small towns to big cities, in every congressional district and state, nonprofits feed, heal, shelter, and nurture people of all walks of life and every political persuasion. From hospitals to libraries, churches to food banks, from veterans to school children, artists to researchers, charitable nonprofits touch and benefit all Americans all our lives. Nonprofits are local, accountable, transparent, and are nonpartisan by law and in practice. The vast majority of nonprofits are small to mid-sized. 92% have budgets of less than $1 million. Nonprofits step in to fill gaps not met by government or other entities alone. They show up in times of crisis, providing disaster relief, hotlines, and safety from danger, and they meet everyday needs in local communities, from providing childcare and elder care, job training, or essential food and shelter. Simply put, the work of charitable nonprofits improves lives and strengthens communities and the country. Nonprofits represent the best of America, neighbors helping neighbors. Despite this essential work, nonprofits are at risk and under attack by this administration and by some in Congress. Across the country, nonprofits are having federal funding slashed or eliminated due to arbitrary cuts of congressionally approved spending and through reckless and unlawful federal funding freezes by the Trump administration. These actions are causing real harm. Food banks across the country, already struggling with high levels of need, are serving fewer meals due to spending cuts. Nonprofit health clinics have closed, leaving neighbors without access to potentially life-saving care. Nonprofits focused on preventing violence and crime have seen their budgets disappear, putting a stop to critical work. After-school programs have been canceled and school lunch programs are squeezed. Nonprofits that serve young mothers, respond to disasters, help address mental health or substance use, or operate child enrichment programs face funding shortfalls. And the threats to nonprofits are broader than federal funding. Senior members of this administration and some witnesses here today give egregious mischaracterizations of the work of nonprofits, even using dangerous rhetoric to vilify nonprofits. There are repeated threats against nonprofits that hold views that don't align with this administration, from statements calling for the illegal, unilateral revoking of their tax-exempt status, to attempted takeovers, audits, and even threats of civil or criminal investigations by the federal government, not for any wrongdoing, but for doing work at odds with the administration's ideology. The administration's targeting of organizations and institutions with which it disagrees is a fundamentally un-American action and something that should concern us all. These actions aren't about government efficiency or about reform. They are attempted censorship disguised as accountability. This is weaponization of the federal government to chill dissent, and it is wrong, whatever party is in control. In a functioning and healthy democracy, nonprofits must be free to identify and meet local needs without political interference, fear of retribution, or facing punishment for holding a different point of view from those in political power. Nonprofits are the backbone of our country, providing critical support to communities and saving lives. Defending and supporting their essential work shouldn't divide us along political lines. It should unite us as Americans. Thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. The American people definitely support nonprofits, but what they don't support is corruption, waste, fraud, and abuse. In 2024, right as the Biden administration was leaving office, the Democrats finalized the awards that amounted to $20 billion under its greenhouse gas reduction slush fund to launder government funding to 8 politically aligned nonprofits, several of which were newly created solely to join in on the massive grift. One of these awardees is Power Forward. Mr. Turner, you've spent a lot of time diving into leftist green NGOs. Was the NGO Power Forward just created a couple of years ago, yes or no?
Yes.
In fiscal year 2023, did Power Forward report only $100 in revenue on their 990 financial disclosure form?
Yes.
Was Power Forward slated to receive $2 billion in federal funding?
Yes, that's 20 million times revenue.
Is it commonplace for completely new nonprofits with zero track record to receive a multi-billion-dollar grant from the federal government?
There is no private entity that would give an organization 20 million times revenue after a few months of creation. Only government is stupid enough to do that.
That's right. There's no business in America could get that loan from a bank. Is Rewiring America part of the same NGO coalition as Power Forward?
Part of the same coalition, yes.
Did Rewiring America hire Stacey Abrams?
She's affiliated with the organization. It's unclear in what capacity, but yes.
Is she an energy expert?
No.
So it's pretty eye-opening that a brand new politically connected group got such a massive federal grant. Rewiring America hired Stacey Abrams, as far as we know, a twice-failed candidate for Georgia governor and well-known Democrat activist, even though she has little to no knowledge of energy policy. But the leader of Power Forward praised Abrams for playing a pivotal role in securing these billions. Notably, Abrams' PAC spent over $126 million on Democrat campaigns over the last 5 years. This recirculation of taxpayer funds literally is the Democrats' circle of life. Mr. Krikorian, we witnessed the worst border immigration catastrophe under the Biden administration. It seems to me that many immigration-oriented NGOs have double-dipped their hands in taxpayer money. My first question is, how influential were the American taxpayer-funded NGOs at facilitating the movement of illegal aliens to and through our country's borders?
Extremely influential. Now, some of this would have happened anyway because of the Biden administration's invitation to mass illegal immigration. But the invitation required some means of this happening, some means of doing it. And so what it did is the taxpayer money essentially turned the illegal immigration crisis up to 11. It would have existed otherwise, but it was significantly magnified by this government funding.
By the Biden's administration policies.
Right.
You've mentioned that the United Nations pay psychologists to help illegal aliens reverse asylum denials on appeal. Specifically, tax dollars go to the UN, which directs and pays psychologists to help illegal aliens unearth repressed memories of torture, persecution, and human rights violation so that they can legally claim asylum. Is this an intentional effort to subvert our immigration laws by creating fake narratives for asylum seekers?
I can't put myself into someone else's head, but I can't imagine any other plausible way to describe it. And initially, just to be clear, they use this to get Mexican asylum, which they use as a kind of trampoline to get to the United States, and then present those repressed memory documents as part of their evidence when they are in removal proceedings as part of their asylum claims.
And do they provide legal help to apply for asylum claims?
That's inside the United States, so that's beyond the scope of my testimony here.
Thank you. Mr. Walter, you've been investigating NGO funding sources for a long time. Do you know of other examples of former elected or appointed officials in the NGO sector securing significant federal tax dollars through grants or contracts?
We've had mentioned here the $2 billion slush fund, and of course, the OMB and HUD director, Sean Donovan, has been mixed up in that. And then, of course, there have been public reports as well about the millions of dollars that the wife of Senator Sheldon Whitehouse has received from NGOs whose legislation he's helped push.
Yeah, thank you. My time has expired, and thank you all for being here. I now recognize Ranking Member Stansbury for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairwoman. And I want to welcome back some of our guests here today. Mr. Krikorian, I recognize you from last summer when you came to testify. Welcome back. Just want to clarify, you served on the board for Project 2025, is that correct?
I don't think I was on a board. We were one of the advisors for it, but yes.
So yes, you served in an advisory role on Project 2025. I appreciate that. And Mr. Walter, I just want to clarify a few things about Capital Research Center. This is the organization that acted as a fiscal sponsor for Ginny Thomas's nonprofit, correct?
For a project that she was one of many people involved with, yes.
Yes, and this is Jenny Thomas, Justice Clarence Thomas's wife. And my understanding is that there was a donor-advised fund that was the primary donor to that funding under your fiscal sponsorship. In fact, it looks like about $400,000 was channeled through your organization. And if I'm correct, based on what I see here, the primary donors are the Koch brothers, the Searles, the Mercers, and Leonard Leo. And some of you may recall Leonard Leo because, of course, he's at the center of many of the big issues around Supreme Court ethics, but also you all may recognize him because last week Donald Trump called him a sleazebag who probably hates America for his interference in the judiciary and his efforts to try to undermine what Donald Trump is trying to do. So a very interesting cast of characters indeed. And Mr. Turner, as I understand it, you're a former employee of the Koch Institute, correctly?
Yes.
All right. So I think, these are always very interesting hearings we have in the Oversight Committee. We have some retreads of some witnesses who've been here before, all of which are participants in organizations that were involved in Project 2025 that are funded through the same dark money networks and organizations of the Koch brothers and Leonard Leo and the Searles and the Mercers who fund all this stuff, Project 2025, the stuff that's happening in front of the Supreme Court, rolling back our rights, that helped to get over 70 Project 2025 authors placed in the administration acting in high-level roles right now that are bringing cases in front of the Supreme Court, undermining our democracy, and which are attacking organizations who are working on civil society programs. So I think I already said this, but I think it's very clear what is going on here. And I want to point out that the project that Ms. Jenny Thomas was fundraising for through Capital Research Center, let's see, what was the direct quote? Literally was formed with the mission to attack the left, a culture war, to wage a culture war against the left. So I think we can see what's going on here. But this is not a joke, right? Ms. Yentl, you're here in your role of helping to advise nonprofit organizations and provide institutional infrastructure. I know there's been a number of untrue things said here today, both about your own professional background, as well as the affiliated organizations that help to support our small nonprofits across the country. But I think it is really important, and this is a message we want to drive home today, that the attacks on nonprofit organizations that the Trump administration is undertaking, including trying to find executive authority to take away tax-exempt status, are both illegal and immoral. Would you agree?
Excuse me. Thank you for the question. Yes, it is illegal for the president or any member of the executive office to direct the IRS to make any changes to the tax status of an individual or an organization. And in fact, the law makes clear that if the president threatens to revoke tax-exempt status from an individual organization, they can be convicted up to 5 years in prison.
And so could you please tell us, we want to make sure that for any nonprofit watching, because I know there are probably hundreds, if not thousands across the country, because they're deeply concerned of what might be coming, what should nonprofits be doing to prepare if DOJ or the administration tries to either infiltrate or take away their status?
Well, nonprofits should know that that's illegal, and they do. That's part of what we've been working to educate nonprofits. But mostly what nonprofits should continue to do is the incredibly important, vital work that they do in communities, and to try not to be distracted by threats and unlawful actions by the president. Nonprofit organizations are local, they are transparent, accountable, they are nonpartisan, and they do vital work in communities, with communities, identifying and prioritizing local needs, and then working with the communities to meet those needs in ways that the government and other private entities don't.
The gentlelady's time has expired. I now recognize the Chairman of Oversight, Mr. Comer from Kentucky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Turner, I've launched an investigation, or the committee has, we all have, into the role of former senior White House officials in possibly abusing the authority of former President Joe Biden while the former president was rapidly deteriorating mentally and physically. We will be conducting transcribed interviews of a number former White House officials to understand who was really making the decisions for President Biden. Your group, Power the Future, has expressed concerns that over half a dozen of the Biden administration executive actions, which were signed by the auto pen, related to climate policy should be deemed null and void, again, due to the fact that they were signed by the auto pen without any public comment from President Biden confirming his knowledge of them. Now, why is it important that the American people know the truth about whether President Biden knowingly signed these orders, making significant and drastic shifts in our energy policy?
Thank you for the question, sir. We're looking at this from the sense of deceit of the American people. This is impersonation of the president. Staffers, of course, have a lot of leniency in what they do working on behalf of the president, but these executive orders that we identified, there's no evidence of Joe Biden in first person, in his voice as president, talking about them. And I see some Pennsylvanians on the panel. When you ban the export of liquid natural gas and you never get asked about it in person, one has to wonder if Joe Biden did it or if his staffer did it on his behalf.
You specifically expressed concern that President Biden was not aware of that specific action to implement the executive order pausing liquefied natural gas permits. Now, why are you specifically concerned the president was unaware of that specific order?
Well, there's an anecdote from earlier this year where Speaker of the House Johnson mentioned he was in conversation with President Biden and brought it up. And the president said, "I don't know what you're talking about." At the time, that was understood as, wow, maybe the president's a little worse off than we realized. But maybe two things can be true. Maybe he really didn't know what Speaker Johnson was talking about. Maybe he had no idea he passed this executive order. And if the president has never asked about it and he hides from the press and there's no opportunity for him to get asked in public about it, how do we know he actually did it? And these are serious executive orders. This is not...
It is bizarre. You know, when President Trump signed his executive orders, we saw him sign the executive orders. He had a big event. He was, they were talking about the executive orders. They said, this is what this specific executive order is. We never saw any of that.
No, and lives were destroyed, sir. And when you ban the export of liquid natural gas, there are hundreds of thousands of men and women who work in the natural gas industry. Lives were destroyed. People went bankrupt because of that. And we have no evidence that Joe Biden himself actually
We haven't found any evidence either that, and ironically, unlike some of the investigations we've done in the past with respect to the former president, not many of the colleagues on the other side of the aisle are disputing many of the things that have come out in the Tapper book, the things that have come out with statements like what former Transportation Secretary Buttigieg and others have said, that they were shielded from the president. So we look forward to having these staffers come in. Our committee will be conducting transcribed interviews, possibly depositions, depending on how quickly they come in, and hopefully we'll get the truth to the American people. I want to switch gears and talk about the NGOs. The full committee has another investigation into the green energy scam. I don't know how else to put it, known as the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and the NGOs that receive significant amounts of money through it. Can you tell us a little bit about this? And the NGOs and the left, obviously they advocate for initiatives as an excuse to spend billions in local communities, but enrich themselves too. Who else benefits from these handouts? You know, every Democrat, I know Ms. Stansbury loves government programs. They love to spend money and create bureaucracies, but who really benefits from programs like this specific scam that I talked about?
The operatives aligned to these organizations, consultancy groups, PR firms, lawyers, and it's all just an enormous cabal.
That
They
sounds
hire
like a
each
base for one of the two political parties.
100%.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. We look forward to this committee working to get the truth to the American people and try to get spending under control. And we're going to see if these executive orders were really authorized by the president, or if this was being done unilaterally by some unnamed bureaucrats. Madam Chair, thank you for this subcommittee hearing. I yield back.
Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.